Good morning, everyone. So yes, I am Erin. As you heard, I'm a professor at INSEAD, business school outside of Paris. I study culture in the workplace. And today we're going to be talking specifically about how to develop an organizational culture or a team culture that really breeds innovation and flexibility. So we're going to be using this kind of crazy, extreme organizational culture as a case study today. And as you heard, that is Netflix. So I was very excited to do this research project at Netflix because Netflix has managed to do something that is extremely rare, which is they've managed to reinvent themselves multiple times in just a few short years. So some of you might know that it actually was not long ago that Netflix was a DVD by mail company. So they had these big warehouses around the US, they were putting these DVDs into red envelopes, and then they were mailing them off to their customers, right? And then of course the environment shifted, right? And Netflix reinvented themselves, this time as a streaming company, streaming rerun television shows and old movies out to their client base, right? And then of course the environment shifted and Netflix reinvented themselves, this time as a media company, right? Hiring actors and directors and competing with companies like Disney. And that kind of flexibility in an organization, it's very unusual. Their founder and CEO, Reed Hastings, claims that this flexibility is because of their highly unorthodox organizational culture. So I managed to do this big research project at Netflix. I interviewed hundreds of people. I spent a lot of time with Reed Hastings himself. And I want to just talk with you today about some of the things that I learned that I think are actually useful for people in other industries and other companies to learn from. Okay? Now, let me say that there was kind of like one overall learning that I took from all of this, which is that I realized that the vast majority of companies today and the vast majority of what I was teaching at INSEAD is sort of like this industrial era hangover. And what I mean by that is that during the industrial era, of course, we were all obsessed with error prevention, replicability, and consistency. Right? And if you are running a manufacturing plant today, those are still your primary goals, right? But in a growing number of teams and organizations, the primary goal, the primary risk is no longer making a mistake, right? The primary risk is now that we don't think freshly enough or we're not flexible enough so that we become irrelevant. Right? So that was kind of like my overall learning, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, some of you may be aware of Netflix culture. Maybe you've known about it for a long time. Perhaps you are one of the 20 million people who downloaded this now very famous Netflix culture deck, which is this set of slides that Netflix released onto the internet in 2009. If you're aware of it, you know it begins like this. Many companies have nice-sounding value statements displayed in the lobby, such as integrity, communication, respect, excellence, right? Enron, for example, whose leaders went to jail and who went bankrupt from fraud, had these exact value systems displayed in their lobby, right? So I just wanted to begin, my kind of number one lesson from this research was to recognize that if you want to articulate an organizational culture or a team culture, right, that really takes root and impacts your employees' behavior, you want to avoid speaking or discussing in absolute positives. And what I mean by that, okay, like this word integrity, right? Integrity is a great word, but you know what? There's no good, credible option to integrity, right? Like no organization would say, oh my gosh, here we are all about corruption. Right? And because of that, instead what we want to do is think in dilemmas when we're thinking about how to define our organizational culture. And I thought we would just have a little bit of fun today. I thought I would give you a couple of dilemmas in order to kind of show you what I mean, okay? So I'm going to put you in a situation. I'm going to give you a situation, and then I'm going to ask you all to vote, either A or B. You'll raise your hand, right? Based on how you believe you would handle the situation. Okay? All right, now the first situation starts like this. You are a marketing manager, and you are managing a team of 8 marketing specialists, okay? Now, you've got a great team, really good collaboration on your team. Everything's going well. It's just that you are in discussions with your own boss about a possible organizational restructuring. Now, if this restructuring takes place, it's going to have a big impact on your team. I don't mean people are going to lose their jobs, but they'll be moved to other departments, they'll have new bosses, new colleagues. Some might even be asked to move, right? Now, there's about 60% chance likely that this will happen, and if it happens, it will happen in about 4 months, okay? So my question for you is, are you going to share this information with your team now? Okay, now you have to vote. Okay, there's no it depends, okay? A or B, all right? Okay, so A would be, in a moment you'll raise your hand, right? But A would be, no, I'm not gonna tell them now, right? Because if I tell them now, they're likely to get panicked, distracted. They might even start looking for other jobs. So I'm just gonna keep the information to myself till I know more, right? Or B would be, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna tell them now because I want them to feel that I'm always totally transparent with them, right? And that they know I always tell them everything I know so they can really trust me. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote, okay? All right, so let's, how many of you say, you know, no, I'm gonna wait, right? I'm gonna wait until I have more information, until I'm sure. Let's see a show of hands. Okay, so we have a lot of A's in the room. Okay, now let's vote for B's. How many B's do we have? Oh, we have a lot of B's, even some more B's. And we have a good dilemma. And in fact, it was such a dilemma that some of you were paralyzed. I saw we didn't get votes from everyone. Okay, paralyzed with indecision. Okay, don't worry, you'll have another opportunity. My only point now is that in this situation, we can really see that organizational transparency has come into tension with another good value, which is team stability, right? These are the kinds of dilemmas or tensions that we want to think about, debate when we're thinking about the kind of organizational culture that we have, that we want to have. Because when we tell our well-meaning employees, you know, when you come across this kind of dilemma in this organization, go right. That's when we really see that our words start to turn into actions and an organizational behavior, right? Okay, let's do one more dilemma, okay? This one starts out in the same way. So you are still leading a team of 8 marketing specialists, all right? Now, you've got one woman on your team whose name is Sheila, and one day she comes into your office, and she is very excited. She says, oh, boss, I got to tell you, I have a great idea for how to move the organization forward, right? Okay, she tells you her idea. She says, you know what? I know it's going to be expensive. I know it's going to take a lot of resources, right? But I really think it's going to lead to great results, right? Now, you love Sheila's enthusiasm, but the problem is that you, Sheila's boss, you don't think this is going to work, right? So you say, hey, Sheila, thank you for your passion, but I have some concerns, right? You tell her your concerns and you say, you know what? Let's think about it for a week and then we'll meet again, right? Okay, so you both think about it for a week. She comes back next week into your office. She is even more excited than she was the week before. Okay, no, you know what, boss? I've been talking to a lot of people about it. I've heard all sorts of fors and against. I thought about your concerns and some ways to mitigate the risk, right? What do you think, boss? Can I get started? Right? The problem is that now, even more than ever, you don't think this is going to work out. Okay, so you have a dilemma, right? Sheila's boss. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a vote. What are you going to do? Are you going to, would you let your employee invest in a project you think will fail? Yes, because you want Sheila to feel empowered to invest in anything she really believes in, right? Okay, that's A. Or B, no, you know what? I'm the boss here. I don't think this is going to work out, so I'm not going to waste company money on something I don't think is going to happen. Okay, let's go ahead and vote, please. How many vote for A? Let's see a show of hands. Oh, we have a lot of A's, a lot of A's. Okay, how about some B's? Do we have some B's in the room? Oh my gosh, we have a lot of B's. Okay, a lot less people who are paralyzed by indecision. Okay, great. Okay, here, of course, what we've seen is that a culture of innovation has come into tension with a culture of error prevention. right? I mean, we all know that as a boss, our job is at least partially to use the company's resources wisely, right? But on the other hand, we all know that innovation requires trying things out. Some of those things will work, some of those things will fail, and we also all know that as a boss, we have been wrong before, right? Okay, so we're going to come back to Sheila a little bit later. For now, I just wanted to make that first message, which is that as you are thinking about the type of organizational or team culture that you want, right, avoid these absolute positive words, because no team would say, oh my gosh, on this team, we are all about disrespect. Right? So instead, we want to really focus on those dilemmas that our well-meaning employees are dealing with and tell them, here, when you come across that dilemma, go left, for example, right? Okay, now the next question is, if you desire to develop an organizational culture that breeds innovation and flexibility, then what would be the dilemmas that you would want to focus on, right? And in order to start that part of the discussion, I'm going to tell you a story. So the first time that I interviewed Reed Hastings, he told me about his first company, which was an organization called Pure Software. There he is in the middle as a young man. He opened up this company. At the beginning, this was a small entrepreneurial company, and it was just a group of people, passionate people, who were operating, let's say, fast and loose. And what I mean by that was that there were no processes slowing them down, no policies telling people what they could and couldn't do. Everybody was just using their best judgment for the good of the company, right? But then the company started to grow to a few hundred people, a few thousand people. Some people did stupid stuff, and some people took advantage of the freedom that was allotted to them. So for example, there was this guy named Jim, and he used to fly every week from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Because there was no travel policy, he started flying first class, right? And there was this woman named Charlotte, and she had this little puppy dog that didn't like to be left alone. Because there was no rule saying she couldn't, she started bringing the dog to work, who eventually chewed a big hole in the conference room carpet, right? Now, as those things happened, Reed was frustrated with the waste. So he sat down with human resources, right? And together, they created an employee handbook, right? And in the employee handbook, there were all sorts of policies, travel policies, expense policies, no dogs at work rules, things like that, right? Now, as that handbook started to take root, it did save the company some money. Right? But something else happened, which was that the most kind of creative, mavericky thinkers in the organization, they started to leave the company. Because people like that, they usually want to work in a place that they can run free, right? Something else happened. I have a short video of Reed Hastings for 1.5 minutes telling you what happened next. Here we go.
The great thing about being able to do 2 companies in my life is not making the same mistakes. So in the first company, as we grew and went public, we put in, a lot of process, because we had the idea, if we could just eliminate errors, think how good we can be. And so every time something went wrong, we put in a new process. And we were so proud that we dummy-proofed the system. And what we didn't realize is if you dummy-proof the system, only dummies want to work there. And so then the market changed, and all of the kind of innovative, crazy thinkers had gone, and everybody who was still there was really good about following the rules. But the market had shifted. This was the rise of Java and the internet. And we were unable as a company to adapt. And that's when it hit for me. Short-term optimization about being efficient is the death of long-term success and innovation. And that we should build a company in Netflix that tolerated some short-term chaos. And we manage right on the edge of chaos. And the value of that is keeping and stimulating the amazing thinkers. So when the market shifts, like DVD to streaming or license to expand to original content, we have within Netflix all kinds of original thinkers. And that's the long-term optimization that all of us in organizations want.
Okay, so when Reed sold PureSoft and opened up Netflix, he had two primary lessons that were driving his thinking, right? The first is employee freedom breeds innovation, right? And the second is process kills organizational flexibility, right? But he also had some concerns. He worried that as the company grew large, if he didn't put in place these control mechanisms, that the organization was likely to descend into mayhem, right? Not operate on the edge of chaos, descend into chaos. So he thought about how to deal with that, and he came up with what we will call the Netflix experiment. And the Netflix experiment was basically this. Okay, in most companies, most control mechanisms are put in place in order to deal with those like kind of average employees, right? But your top employees, like the really good ones, they don't really need to be controlled, right? So what if I were to try to create an organization that was made up only of those top employees? If I were able to do that, then I could give them a lot more freedom. But I might still have people who try to take advantage of the freedom that's allotted to them. So what if sorry, I have to go back to that first point. Okay, so the first point was increase talent density, right? Now, when Reed decided he wanted to hire top performers, it was a concern because he actually didn't have very much money, right? It was a small company. No one knew Netflix. He didn't know how he was going to attract that kind of talent. But Reed is a software engineer, and apparently software engineers know something that I didn't know, which is sometimes referred to as the rock star principle. And the rockstar principle is basically that if you take like 10 software engineers who all have the same training, that the best one will deliver at least 10 to 25 times the value of the average one. And that's because the best one has the ability to see conceptual patterns that are not obvious to other people, right? And the best one, when she comes across a roadblock, she has ideas for how to kind of push and prod around the problem that are not obvious to other people. And Reed thought, well, that's the same in any knowledge job, in any creative job. So what if I try to hire a lot less people, like maybe only 10% the number of people, but I pool all my money together and offer them a lot more money, like up to 10 times as much money, right? Then I could increase talent density, right, in my organization. Okay, so that's the first part, right? Now, to deal with those people who might take advantage of the freedom, what if I also were to try to create a culture where people were really outspoken, like we're really giving one another a lot of kind of open and candid feedback on an ongoing basis? That would help, because then when Jim flies first class, someone would say, hey, Jim, I don't think that's a good use of company's money, right? Perhaps if I were able to do those two things, then we could offer an unprecedented amount of employee freedom. Okay? All right, so that's the experiment. What I'd like to do now, I think it worked out okay for them, but what I'd like to do now is go through those three elements with you, and I'd like to start now, the next one, the first one, with our third dilemma. Okay, are you ready? Okay, this is a really provocative one. All right. Okay, it starts like this. You are still a marketing manager of 8 marketing specialists. When you opened up this team last year, your goal was to create a high-performing organization, right? So you did everything you could to find the best and pay them whatever necessary to get them, right? And after you found them, you threw your energy into coaching them and giving them feedback. And now, 1 year in, 7 of your employees are amazing, right? Those people, they are the best. And then there's Fritz. Now, the thing about Fritz is that he's not a poor performer. He's just kind of adequate, right? He's sort of average, right? So on the one hand, Fritz is a nice person. He seems to be doing his best, right? So that's up on the pro side. On the con side, you've now seen after a lot of coaching and feedback that Fritz is never going to turn in to the top performer that you hoped he would. So my question to you is, are you going to let go of Fritz? Right, that's what we have to decide in the room. Okay, so let's see. You have two options. Obviously, no, I'm going to keep Fritz on the team. He's a nice guy. He's doing his best. He can stay, right? Or B, yes, I'd let go of him. I'm sorry, Fritz. This is not the right home for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote. How many of you would vote for A? Keeping Fritz. Oh, Fritz is so appreciative. Okay, thank you. Okay, we got a lot of save Fritzes in the audience. How about some Bs? Fritz has got to find a new home. Okay, we have a lot of Bs in the audience. We have a dilemma. Oh my gosh. Now I want to tell you that those of you who voted for keeping Fritz, when Reed opened when Reed opened Netflix, he actually agreed with you. So he wanted a high-performing organization, but he also believed the reality of any team was that there were always some top performers and some average ones. He'd never seen a team that was different than that. Beyond that, he felt if his employees were hardworking and nice people, if he fired them, that would show to the group that he wasn't loyal, and in return, they wouldn't be loyal to him, right? So Netflix opened in 1997, and by 2001, it had grown to 120 people. The company was doing fine. The atmosphere around the office was okay, right? Then in the fall of 2001, there was a financial crisis, right? And Reed found out that he was going to have to close Netflix or lay off 1/3 of his workforce. He didn't have a choice. So he sat down with human resources, and they went through every name on the list, right? Anyone who was excellent technically, but a little bit obnoxious or a poor team player, those people were going to have to go. And all the Fritzes, they were going to have to go, right? So the day came, he did the layoffs, people screamed and cried and slammed doors. It was a horrible day. But then within 3 months, the most surprising thing happened, which is that the atmosphere around the office seemed to have improved dramatically. It was like he now had these 80 employees that were madly in love with their work, right? And their passion and enthusiasm was rubbing off on one another. They were learning from one another, and that performance was spiraling up. Now, Reed didn't know why this had happened, so he spent a lot of time talking to his employees, and he finally came to a conclusion. And his conclusion was, for top performers, a really great workplace is not about a fancy corner office, right? For top employees, a great workplace is about being surrounded by the best, right? Now, I do want to tell you that Reed is not the first person to discover that performance is contagious. Actually, I have a colleague at another business school. His name is Professor William Phelps. And Professor Phelps conducted a research project where he invited 4 MBA students into his lab at a time. He gave them a 45-minute task, and he rewarded them financially based on how well they behaved. Oh, sorry, not behaved. How well they performed, right? Now, unbeknownst to them, on 50% of the groups, on the teams, there was an actor who was this guy named Nick. And Nick had been hired to act just like a regular MBA student, but to do some things that were undesirable. Like sometimes he would act bored. He might put his feet up on the desk and text his girlfriend, right? Sometimes he would act a little bit obnoxious. He might say things like, "Have you ever attended a business school class before?" Right? And what was very interesting, first of all, was that Professor Phelps showed that on those teams that had Nick on them performed almost 50% worse than those teams that didn't, even when the other MBA students were top of their class. There's something else. William Phelps is going to tell you in a short audio clip what else happened. Here we go.
But what was sort of eerily surprising was how these team members would start to sort of take on his characteristics. So, for example, I mean, we videotaped all of these, and you would see that people would start. Well, so when he was a jerk, they would be a jerk too, right? So they would start being a little bit insulting or abrasive or obnoxious. And what was really interesting is they wouldn't just do it sort of in response to him, but also to each other, right? So this is sort of like a spillover effect.
I'm always sorry to have to give this information, but what Professor Phelps proved is that when it comes to team performance, the best predictor of how a team will perform is not what the top performer is like. It's not what the adequate performer is like. Most often, the best predictor of how a team will perform comes down to what the lowest team member is like. Or in other words, poor performance is especially contagious, right? Now, I think most of us, when we think about Fritz, we think, oh, well, that's an individual performance problem, right? Like, that's a problem between Fritz and me, Fritz's manager. But we know from a lot of research that an individual performance problem is not an individual problem. An individual performance problem is a systemic problem that impacts the entire team, sometimes even the entire organization, right? Okay, now, whatever you want to do with Fritz, I leave that up to you, but I will tell you that Reed became laser focused on keeping this type of talent density in his organization, and he implemented something that he calls the keeper test. Okay, it's very provocative. You might hate it, but I do think it's very interesting. And basically what you do is you ask yourself a question. You ask all your managers in your organization to ask themselves a question, maybe once a year, right? And the question is, you know, like if your employee comes into your office, like Stan comes into your office, and Stan says, I'm leaving the company, right? How are you going to feel? Right? Are you going to be devastated? Are you going to say, oh my gosh, no, Stan, don't leave me, right? Are you going to fight to keep Stan? Well, if so, you know he's the best person for that spot, right? Are you going to feel relieved? Are you going to think, oh good, now I can spend my attention where I want to on my top performers? Are you going to feel excited thinking about who you could get in that spot? Well, I can tell you, if you'd feel relieved or excited if one of your employees tells you they're leaving the team, then you have another question to ask yourself, which is, have I given that person the feedback they need to succeed? If not, you better go give that feedback right now, right? But if you have been giving it and you'd still be relieved, I think that's a clear signal that something has to change, right? Okay. At Netflix, they're doing this throughout their organization, and that has created this high level of talent density, which then leads to the ability to give employees a lot of freedom. We'll come back to that later. Okay, are you ready for your fourth dilemma? Yeah, okay. This one is not provocative. The issue with this one is whether you will tell the truth. Okay, okay, I have some experience that people do not always tell the truth. Okay, now please notice that the question is, would you, not should you? Okay, all right, the situation starts the same. You are still on a team of 8 marketing specialists. Okay, but you are no longer the manager of the team. Now you are just a marketing specialist. You are just one of the crowd. Okay, one of the team. Now one day you go to a meeting with a customer and one of your colleagues who you know a little bit and have a friendly relationship with, but you are not close to. Okay, and this colleague of yours, he's a little bit senior to you in the organization, but he's not your boss. Okay, now in the meeting, your colleague does something that you wish that he wouldn't, which is that he speaks with such volume and intensity that it doesn't leave a lot of room for other energy in the room. And you can kind of see your customer sort of shrinking back in the face of his intensity. You wish he wouldn't do this, and it's not good for the customer relationship. The meeting is over, and you have a dilemma, right? Okay, now the thing is that he has not asked you for feedback, right? He didn't ask you for feedback. You don't know if he wants it or if he's going to take it well, right? On the other hand, if he did take the feedback openly, you see that could really help him, you, the client, the organization, right? What are you going to do? Okay, now I gave you some C's. I gave you a C this time, so we'll get a vote from everyone, right? Okay, so here we go. Let's try. So we have yes, maybe, or no, right? So let's try. How many of you say, yes, I am going to give the feedback? Let's see a show of hands. Oh my gosh, do we have a lot of yeses? I'm going to come back to that in a moment. How about some B's? Do we have some maybes? Some maybes? Yeah, a few maybes. How about some C's? Do we have some C's? Oh, one C, 2, 3 C's. I want to tell you, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. I want to tell you, I had to add a C because I was getting 100% A's, right? No dilemma. And I'd say to the group, oh, that's so interesting. You'd all give the feedback? What about your team members, right? Your colleagues, do you think they'd give the feedback? Oh, no. No, they wouldn't give the feedback. No way. I never get any feedback at all, right? And I thought, well, isn't that fascinating that only the people who would give the feedback come to my sessions, right? Okay, now, of course, what's happening here is that we have a dilemma in our own brain when it comes to feedback. It's a dilemma between the frontal cortex and the amygdala, right? The frontal cortex is the most logical part of your brain. The frontal cortex loves feedback, right? And the more direct, the better, because the frontal cortex knows the single best way to improve performance on your team is to get everybody giving feedback to one another, and feedback is free. Right? But the issue is the amygdala. The amygdala is the most primitive part of your brain. The amygdala is very focused on finding safety in numbers, right? So if you give me feedback that you think something I did was not great, or something I could have done something better, my amygdala is likely to start sending off an alarm, right? And that alarm is, oh my gosh, I'm going to get kicked out of this tribe, right? And when that happens, it actually physically throws our body into fight or flight. Fight, you deny it, right? It's not true. I'm not the problem, you're the problem. Right? Or flight, right? Flight. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that feedback. You are totally right. I really appreciate it. And then I try to never speak to you again. Okay, because we all know about the amygdala, most of us, in reality, we say we'd give the feedback, but when it comes down to it, we don't actually get around to it. Why would I bother, right? If you desire to develop an organizational culture where we've got that candid feedback that's improving performance throughout your organization, I just have one simple recommendation, which is put feedback on the agenda, right? I mean, what if I told you after every customer meeting, you always have a meeting with that colleague for him to give you some feedback about what you could do to improve and for you to give him some feedback about what he could do to improve? Would you give the feedback then? I think even the C's would say, well, yeah, in that case, I would. What if your employees every quarter knew they were supposed to meet one-on-one with each of the other colleagues and give 10 minutes of feedback to one another about how they think that person could do a better job? Would you give the feedback then? That's how we get the feedback going. Now, I will tell you that at Netflix, they do one thing that I thought was crazy when I first heard about it. It's what they call these live 360 feedback dinners. And the deal is that like once a year we get together, right? And we go out for a meal for several hours, right? And during that meal, we take turns. So if I'm up first, right, then we go around and, you give me some feedback, and then you give me some feedback, and you give me some feedback, and you give me some feedback, and then we move on to the next person, right? When I first heard about that, I thought, oh my gosh, what's the point? Like, do you have to drag my weaknesses through the group? Can't you tell me that in private, right? But I came to see it was a very interesting mechanism, because when one person gives you feedback, you never know, is that about me or about her? Right? But when you get into this format, you start to see collectively what your areas of focus should be. I have one quote getting from one employee who said, getting publicly ripped apart sounds like torture. Each time I go to a live 360, I'm nervous, but after you get started, you see it'll be fine. Because everyone is watching, people are careful to be generous and supportive with the single intention of helping you succeed. No one wants to embarrass you or attack you. Everyone gets a lot of tough advice, so you're not singled out. When your turn comes, it might be difficult to hear what people have to say, but this is one of the greatest developmental gifts of your life, right? I did start doing these at INSEAD with my team, and I can tell you it was very interesting. So maybe you'll try it out. Okay, you have now eaten your vegetables. What I mean by that is you have implemented the keeper test throughout the organization. You've got that high talent density going. Now I call that your spinach because some of you love the idea of the keeper test and some of you hate it, right? And you have now implemented a culture of candor throughout the team. Now I know some of you love the idea of working at a place where you're getting a lot of open feedback, and some of you think it doesn't sound very comfortable. No, thank you. Right? That's your cauliflower. But the deal is that once you eat your spinach and you eat your cauliflower, then you get to eat your cake, right? And almost everybody loves the cake. Okay, so I want to just give you a list here of so you've got those things in place. Now you're ready to start letting go of all of those controls that we have in most companies that tell people what they can and can't do, right? Here's a list of many control mechanisms that you won't find at Netflix that we have at most companies. As you look at them, you'll see they fall into some different categories. One category is policies. So at Netflix, there is no vacation policy. The vacation policy is take some, right? And at Netflix, the expense policy is simply act in Netflix's best interest, right? But these aren't the important ones. These are just symbols. These are symbols that say to our employees, hey, I trust you to behave like adults. In return, they may behave more like adults, right? I think more interestingly, at Netflix, there are no KPIs, there are no management by objectives, and there are no pay per performance bonuses. You might not think of these things as control mechanisms, but they are, right? These are a way for us to give our employees some level of freedom, but also keep like our hand fully on their shoulder to make sure they're walking in the right direction. But maybe if your talent density was higher, maybe if you had those top employees, maybe you could let go of some of these things. I think most importantly, though, at Netflix, there are no decision-making approvals and there are no approval processes. So if we go back to that situation with Sheila, do you remember Sheila? Sheila was the one that you had to decide whether or not she could do something that was expensive that you didn't think would work out, right? But I didn't tell you if Sheila was a fantastic employee, right? If I told you she was fantastic, if I told you, no, she's the best and has shown you to have excellent judgment, then maybe you'd say, you know what? I don't need to decide. She can make those decisions herself, right? Now at Netflix, they say two things. One is lead with context, not control. And the second is don't seek to please your boss, seek to do what's best for the company. And I'm just going to wrap up with a quick image for you. So in most organizations, the decision-making method is like a pyramid, right? And with a pyramid, we have the CEO who's at the top of the pyramid, and then we have the lower level employees who are at the bottom, right? And the lower level employees, they can make small, unimportant decisions, right? But for anything important or expensive, of course, it has to get pushed up the pyramid for approval, right? But in a growing number of organizations today, the pyramid, the decision-making pyramid is being replaced with the decision-making tree. And with the decision-making tree, the CEO is not at the top. He's down there in the dirt at the roots of the tree, right? Not making decisions for the company, but setting context for decision-making. This is our North Star. These are all the dilemmas we're going to think about and the ways we're going to turn as we're making decisions, right? And then at those The top executives, they're at the large branches at the bottom of the tree, setting more context for their departments. And then we have often the lower level managers who are up there maybe at the small leaves. Those people are making sometimes the multi-million-dollar decisions on an ongoing basis for the company. Now, I just want to end by making 3 quick points. Number one, young talent today, the top talent coming onto the market, they usually want to work for trees. They don't want to work for pyramids, right? Number two, a tree is much more flexible than a pyramid. A pyramid is slow to change direction, but a tree can easily branch off in other directions as needed. And also, a tree can grow a lot faster than a pyramid can if the roots desire, right? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that message to consider. One last quote from Reed. As we gave employees more control over their lives and jobs, it began to dawn on me. Freedom is not the opposite of accountability, as I had previously considered. It is a path towards it. If you treat employees like adults, they will act like adults. If you give employees control over big decisions, they will become increasingly responsible and conscientious. In other words, give freedom to get responsibility. Okay, I know this sounds crazy. You may be thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do any of that. But I hope at least it has given you a few ideas. And I'll be back in a few minutes for the panel. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.